Hey everybody, this is Robert, back with another video. Let's go back to the basics today. I'm talking about the parts of a computer. Now, the most basic parts of the computer, the most stripped down part, the most fundamental parts of the computer, or critical parts of the computer, where every computer and even single board computers will need in order to function. Okay, cut to the intro. Okay, now the most fundamental parts of a computer that will not be able to run without is, first off, you need a motherboard. And it has all the ports you would need for all your connections, like it would have USB ports, headphone jack, even a microphone jack. Also, all of your cables that you'll need to connect various input-output devices, and it would also house the CPU, which is the next thing, the central processing unit. That's where everything gets processed through. So every instruction is in like memory from like RAM usually, which we'll get to, and also cache, which is the quickest. So of course it'll already have registers and cache on the motherboard already. So what the central processing unit does is that it basically processes every instruction from RAM and of course cache, and executes the instruction, which, I mean, just all it is it does what the instruction. So there's an operational code for the instruction, and then what register from cache or RAM to get the item, the values from and to, and then of course writing to it as well. Also a power supply unit to obviously power the thing, because the power supply unit uses DC, and the wall provides AC power. So it converts the 120 volts or 240 volt AC power all the way to DC power. And of course it typically has 5 volt, 3.3 volt, 12 volt, and negative 12 volt connections. So you need a power supply unit to be able to power all of those. And of course, you know that 5 volts powers a USB port. And of course, it'll give power to the USB flash drive, any USB peripherals like this webcam right here that I'm using. Next, you need random access memory, or RAM, and this is where all the instructions will be located, and also all the values will be located. This is the working memory, the quicker access memory. You need enough of that, typically 4 gigabytes or more. If you can do more, then do it. But 4 gigabytes these days for a modern 64-bit processor and basically 64-bit is the number of bits that it requires for it to be word. So most modern computers have 64-bit words instead of 32-bit words. So it's typically x86_64 instead of just x86. So you need RAM, a good amount of RAM. If you don't have enough RAM, it'll start to swap, and that takes a lot of clock cycles to do that, and you don't want that. You don't want too much swapping because it's gonna ruin your performance. It's gonna slow down the computer tremendously. Next thing you need, next critical item is the hard disk drive or the solid state drive. Preferably solid state drive because it's a lot faster, with a few limitations. Now the hard disk drive, if you drop the hard disk drive, it's dead. But a solid state drive, if you drop that, it'll be just fine. So, and that will store all of the information you need, such as programs, the operating system, which we'll get to, music, videos, pictures, documents, that sort of thing. Next, you'll need a graphics processing unit. And for most desktop computers, the graphics processing unit, the GPU, is a separate card. Not always. But for most desktops, the graphics processing unit has a separate card. For most laptops, though, you'll have most likely integrated graphics, which will use the RAM as your graphics memory. The last basic part is, of course, the operating system to put on that hard disk drive or the solid state drive. Usually that's Windows 10, Ubuntu, Linux Mint, or in the case of the Raspberry Pi, Raspbian, which we'll get to toward the end. So let's go into the next section. Parts you need to... Now there are a few different kinds of solid state drives. There's the 2.5 inch, which can fit most laptops, but most modern laptops have this new solid state disk called M.2, and it's basically just a stick that you can screw onto the computer, which you'll need, of course, screwdriver and screws. Typically you'll need the flathead and the Phillips screwdriver, which is just like a cross or a plus sign. That's the Phillips screwdriver. But you may also need the Torx T6 and maybe the Pentagon screwdriver, or the star shape screwdriver. It depends on what computer you're working with, but most of the time you'll need the Phillips screwdriver. Especially for the M.2 SSDs. Now the 2.5 inch SSDs are usually SATA connected, like SATA 3, I believe, or even SATA 4. So, and the SATA just means serial ATA connector. Yeah, it usually has like a small 4-pin connector for power and then a bigger connector for data. Next you need a GPU, graphics card, which I've already discussed. graphics processing unit, and of course the operating system on a USB flash drive or even a DVD. But there's other things you really need. A heat sink for the CPU to dissipate the heat, because it's going to get hot in that computer, because a desktop and a laptop computer use lots of power. A lot more power than mobile, which makes a lot of sense. Also, you need fans to dissipate the heat quicker, so the CPU doesn't go above the boiling point of water, which is 100 degrees Celsius or 212 Fahrenheit. And of course you need a case or a chassis, which, let me show you this one. This is my work computer. So that's the case that goes with it. And of course the cables, which should be included for the monitor, Ethernet, power, GPU, speakers. Now you probably have to buy the cable for the Ethernet cable, the monitor, and the speakers, but everything else should be provided, especially for power, when you buy the case. But of course, again, you'll need a power cable for sure. You also need a decent quality monitor to display everything. There's a lot of like 4K monitors. In fact, you can buy one from Walmart for like 90 bucks. Or even less for like a 32-inch monitor. And of course, the 32-inch monitor is measured diagonally. And you also need thermal paste for the heatsink, and that will connect to the CPU after you put it in the CPU in. Now there's some optional things as well. Optional Wi-Fi card so you can connect to Wi-Fi, optional optical disk drive, and an optional webcam, microphone, and a Bluetooth adapter for Bluetooth connectivity. Those are optional because it's not really required to build the computer in general. But it is very useful to connect for if you want to connect to Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or webcam like the one I've got here. Oh, this is 720p, by the way, resolution. So 1280 by 720. Of course, I mentioned screwdriver and screws. You'll need a keyboard, a mouse, and also external or internal speakers for audio. And of course, you'll need other software. Windows 10 will usually have a basic driver for everything, but you may need a specific driver from the manufacturer's website. Now, of course, if I missed anything, let me know in the comments. I definitely want to know. And I think it'll educate everybody else, too. So, there is, of course, an alternative to all those parts. Somewhat. You'll still need a few other parts, but you could also use a single board computer such as the Raspberry Pi 4 Model B as the motherboard, and of course a micro SD card for the storage drive and a touchscreen for the display. And for the OS, it's Raspbian. Now I will put a picture of at least the Raspberry Pi website. I'm going to remind myself at this point, okay, to do that. Okay, so if you're going to get the Raspberry Pi, get at least the 2 or 4 gigabytes of RAM, at least. Since it's kind of single board computer, so it's kind of like mobile. So yeah, that's what you. And so get the 2 or 4 gigabytes of RAM at least for the Raspberry Pi, and also micro HDMI to HDMI adapter, or micro HDMI to DVI or VGA, and those are a lot of, or even DisplayPort. So those are the different connectors that exist, and they're still popular. Other than that, that's all for this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and any questions, just comment down below. Take care. See you in the next video. Bye!